Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guests are Laura Knight-Jadczyk and Harrison Koehli. First, a couple of announcements. Be sure to watch the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana, available on Tubi, Roku channel, and multiple streaming platforms. Also, get a Rokfin premium membership at rokfin.com/FKN+. And be sure to always download our audio episodes through Spreaker. Today I want to welcome Laura Knight-Jadczyk and Harrison Koehli. Laura is an American author and researcher known for her work in exploring the nature of reality, the paranormal, and historical mysteries. Harrison writes the Political Ponerology Substack, hosts the Mind Matters podcast, and is an editor for Red Pill Press. His interests range from psychology and philosophy to obscure spiritual traditions and parapsychology. Laura, Harrison, welcome. How y'all doing?
I'm doing
Excellent.
real well. And everything is just fine. It's just been a little chilly here.
Excellent. Well, welcome. I am looking forward to this discussion. Harrison, welcome. It's good to have you as well. Today we're going to share both of your research and what you call the Cassiopaea Experiment, and this involves channeling hyperdimensional beings. You've been conducting this research since the early 90s, and I'm really looking forward to learning all about it, sharing it with the audience, because I really resonate with a lot of the information that's come out of there. But this is your first time on. Before we get into this, introduce yourselves and tell us just a little bit about the work that you are currently doing.
Well, how about you let Harrison introduce me, and I'll introduce Harrison, because I hate talking about myself.
That works for me.
Go for it, Harrison.
Okay. All right, so all of this may or may not be true. We'll find out afterwards. So, Laura is probably most well known for being the author of several books, something like in the high teens last time I counted. It might be more. Who knows? She's probably got a few stored away on her computer hard drive somewhere. They just haven't seen the light of day. And so she's been writing books for what? Several decades, and her, like you said, this specific line of inquiry and practice started back in the early 90s, so she's been doing that for a few decades too, and even before that, there was a lot of lead up before she started doing, the experiment in channeling. So she's always been a huge reader, interested in all kinds of topics, and so her mind kind of goes in every direction, like whatever it's possible to be interested in, she's probably been interested in at one point or another. And once she gets into a topic, she reads everything there is to read about it and tries to understand it from all angles and to the greatest depth. So I'd say that's probably a decent introduction. Well, she's from Florida, so she's a Florida American girl and a mother. And so she's got a lot of life experience in various different areas of life, and that shows in her books, like especially in her autobiography, her memoir. Well, her autobiography and the Wave, which has a lot of her personal experiences in that which I think are some of the most page-turning portions, because she's led a very interesting life and had a lot of strange and interesting things happen over the years, and a lot of interactions with interesting people. So if you're interested in the paranormal or just really history or politics or anything, there's something in there to find in Laura's vast body of work. So how's that?
Excellent.
Sounds good to me.
Great introduction.
And Harrison's my research buddy. He's a lot younger, but he's extremely well educated, and he is very musically talented, and he engages in research in the Bible, which is, to me, not a lot of young guys do that, but he does it, and he understands it, and he knows how to do it, and he really, really was a big help to me when I was doing the research on my book, From Paul to Mark. And I just referred to him as my Bible buddy. It's not that we're not believers, we're researchers, so we were doing research. And he probably knows more about the Cassiopaean experiment at this point in time than even I do, because he has dug into it. He's written a whole series of articles that are on Substack, just getting ready to be turned into a book where he has really mined those transcripts for some of the most fascinating material that you can possibly imagine, and put it, juxtaposed it with material from whistleblowers, from other authors, from experiencers, and so on and so forth, so that you can see how it all fits together and how the Cassiopaean explanation for things actually turns out to be probably the most coherent and cogent explanation for what's going on in this world and in our reality, behind our reality, of anything I've ever read. So that, and he's from Canada, and so that's my intro of Harrison.
Perfect. Tell us a little bit about the Cassiopaea experiment, and you can each add your own thoughts to what your involvement is with it, but we can start with you, Laura.
Well, it started, quite literally as an experiment, because prior to even attempting anything like that, I mean, I'd had a lot of paranormal type experiences, which, I've chronicled elsewhere, but prior to doing it, I read literally everything on the topic that was available at the time. And remember, this was back in the 80s and early 90s, before internet research was the big thing it is now. And now, for a period of time, internet research was just wonderful because you could find a lot of good stuff. Now it's so controlled, and there's so much noise out there that the noise to information ratio is really bad. But I probably have in my collection of woo-woo books just about every channel book that was available up to that point in time, and I've purchased some since then, because I try to keep up on what's going on. And I was just very dissatisfied with what I was reading. It was, and I've explained this in great detail in my book, Amazing Grace, why I was dissatisfied and why, things just didn't make sense. And, one would say this and one would say another thing. And if you go back into the old accounts of, say, mediumistic activities, where, great mediums like Eileen Garrett and Eusapia Palladino and so forth, and they were just essentially interacting with what you would call, we call humorously dead dudes. They were just interacting with so-called deceased entities, or even entities that had never incarnated. So there were all kinds of things out there. And then along came the UFO alien abduction phenomenon, and then suddenly people started channeling aliens or extraterrestrials of different sorts. And it all looked very suspicious to me, and it all struck me as very trite and easy, and you could you'd read a story about somebody, and I'm exaggerating on it slightly, but they sat down one day in their sunroom, and they put a tinfoil pyramid on their head, and suddenly the voice of some ancient astronaut started talking through them, and they started, spouting these platitudes. Now, the thing is that I read a lot, I research a lot, and very often, if not most of the time, I would read things in these channeled messages that I knew were wrong. I knew that they were, giving wrong information. They were giving wrong historical information. They were giving wrong physiological information. They were giving wrong medical information. They were giving, wrong psychological information, historical, political, so on and so forth. And I knew these to be facts because I'd researched these things rather deeply. So I said, surely there's, everybody has been thinking that there's something out there to communicate with for all of these centuries. I mean, this goes back to some of the ancient stories about Pythagoras, some of the even further back than that to things from the Sumerian tablets, where they were attempting to communicate with, the gods and so forth. So surely the idea that there is something worthwhile communicating with has its inception in some kind of truth. I mean, would so many people think it? But even that, you can't make that assumption. But you think that, well, if there is, maybe let me try how to go about trying to do this, how to contact this truly informative source that's not going to lie to you, and it's not going to give you a bunch of bull, and it's not going to be your own ego. It's not going to be a dead dude, who's kind of tapped into your brain and is passing itself off as an alien astronaut or Swami Beyondananda or whatever, because that happens a lot. And on that topic, I spent a lot of years doing hypnotherapy. So, and I got into at one point in time what they call spirit release therapy. So I knew that there were a lot of people who had a lot of attached entities that would talk through them and that would use their sensorium to, spout whatever their agenda was, and how easy it was to be fooled and deceived. And I'd even done some exorcisms. So I knew, up front, close and personal, what evil felt and tasted like. So, I had these experiences. So I says, well, okay, let me formulate a way to do this experiment so that it's truly experimental. This is not going to be, just somebody sitting down and, getting something in their head and spouting off whatever and saying, this is the truth because, I have said so, or my context said so, or whatever. Let's experiment. And that was why I settled on the dreaded spirit board as the best means of conducting an experiment. Because when you're conducting an experiment, you want to be fully conscious. You preferably will participate with other people utilizing this instrument, so that it's not like one person just sitting there moving something around with their fingers and automatic movements of their arm. There's kind of like, some controls in there. And also with my experience doing spirit release, I used this board in a way that I was actually doing spirit release through the board itself. Because if something came along and said, hi, my name's Dave, and I asked them, were you ever alive? Did you ever have a body? And they would say, well, yes. I says, well, when did you die? And then they would answer, so on and so forth. And then I would send them off to the light. And then somebody would come along and say, oh, I'm an alien from outer space. And then I start asking a series of questions and discover that it's just some kind of, woo-woo spirit that's, floating around trying to get a foothold somewhere. So you get rid of them. So if you're conscious, if you're experienced, if you know what you're doing, you can use a spirit board as a very, very effective tool, because you can send stuff away. It's a matter of mental blocking. And you also have the benefit of having multiple people. Usually have three, no less than two, but for a long time we had three people with their fingers on this little plastic disc at all times that the thing was moving. And you record every single thing that's said, both in the room by the people, but also, you have the recording of what the responses are. Of course, it spells it out one letter at a time. At this point in time, I think, we've done over 1 million letters at least. I'm not sure how many, but it's a lot. And that's how it kind of was born. And I started out having these meetings at my house on Saturday nights, and all the various people that I knew in the local metaphysical type community, or people, from hypnotherapy experiences, and would come, and I would sit with them, and we would try different combinations of people, and just seeing who works, what works. And we went through this for 2 years. 2 years. It was just experiment with, not much in the way of result. There was a lot of transcript from these experimental stages that were really pretty worthless. I mean, they're interesting. They're interesting to somebody who might be, doing something like that to compare to what kind of results they've gotten. But it wasn't worth much. And then one night, I don't even remember exactly. I've written about it in the Wave. I described it, pretty much in detail, closer to the time that it happened, which is now over 20, 30 years ago. 30? I guess it's 30 years ago now. So reading what I wrote in the Wave will get you closer to what happened than me trying to remember it right now. But there was an enormous explosion sound, a big boom over the top of my house. And, we're sitting there, got our fingers on the thing, and I'm saying, is anybody there? And you do that and you wait to see if the thing moves. And there was this big explosion over the top of the house. And I said, what the heck was that? We all jumped up, ran out through the kitchen to the back door, onto the back patio, and looking up, and it was a perfectly clear sky, stars, not a cloud anywhere, no sign of anything, nothing else. But the boom was really directly above the house, and the house, shook from it. So he says, well, that was weird. We went back in and we sat down, and all of a sudden it started moving. And that was the beginning of the Cassiopaean communication. And it just so happened that was also the time of the first impacts of the comet Shoemaker-Levy on the planet Jupiter, which was July 16, 1994. So it was all very interesting that it came together that way and began that way. So we just continued, and it got better, and it was very stiff and very difficult at the beginning, as though there was some kind of transducing problem, like the things didn't quite meet up. But it was pretty startling. The first session was actually pretty shocking. And then we just continued and continued and continued, and now it's to the point where, it's very, very quick, and it works very fast most of the time, and little by little, there's become a more colloquial exchange rather than a very stiff, stilted one, as though somebody didn't know how to speak the language, so to speak. So, but one would assume, and I always have, that if there are such things as higher beings, that they know how to speak any language. See, so those should not be issues. The issue would be on this side, being able to transduce it, to collect it, whatever. Because, higher beings that say, oh, I'm so high, I can't do this or that. Well, how did you get to be a higher being if you didn't start somewhere lower? And if you started lower, then surely, if you're a grown man, you still know how to play marbles, right? Right. You don't lose it. So you don't do it very much, but you still know how. So that's been always my assumption. So I'm going to shut up and let Harrison talk.
One more thing before we go to Harrison. Was there anything that was overwhelming evidence that you are speaking with what they say they are, besides the event in the sky and the different type of communication? Was there any other type of validation?
Well, there was a photograph that was taken, and actually there were a couple of photographs taken. And then there were, and Harrison's the one who's done all of what we call the Cassiopaean hit list. And there were a number of things that they came up with and revealed that nobody could have known, none of the people in the room, and in fact, nobody on the planet at the time.
Interesting.
So that later turned out to be true, because, it's one thing if you have a channel source that tells you something that you cannot validate. But it's something else when it tells you something that nobody could possibly know, but then later gets validated. And actually, there are quite a few things like that, that, scientific information about, or historical information where material has later turned up to be confirmatory to, things that the seas had said. And so there've been quite a few things along that line, and Harrison actually can address that better than I can, I think.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, that latest question was basically, is there anything that can verify basically who they say they are, right, and the whole scenario? And I'd say that there's a lot, not only in channeling in general, but in like in the Cassiopean experiment specifically, that can't necessarily be verified, right? So I put things in different categories. There are the things that that you might ask a question about that can then be checked and say, okay, that's true or false. There are the things that kind of there might be some circumstantial or like supporting evidence from other sources that show you might be on the right track, but it's still hard to nail down one way or the other. And then there's the other stuff, which is just it might be something that's totally unverifiable that we couldn't check if we wanted to. So there are a few different categories. So there are probably some things like that are purely in the realm of, well, that's really interesting. And it would be really interesting if it's true. I wonder if it's true. Maybe one day we'll find out. And then there's kind of the stuff that Laura mentioned, where it's like you can identify a particular hit, as we sometimes call it, where there'll just, and oftentimes it's something that just kind of comes out of nowhere. It's just this weird statement that seems kind of, well, that's kind of weird. I wonder why they'd say that. And then a few years later, you're reading a book or a scientific paper or something, and then there's that factoid or something very similar to it, and it's like, well, okay, well, that's pretty interesting. So there's a few layers or a few levels of kind of interpretation that can be gone through, don't necessarily need to be gone through, but basically, like for me at least. Getting back to your original question about kind of how we got into this and kind of our involvement. Well, when Laura was doing that first session back in 1994, I was still in elementary school, so I had nothing to do with any of this kind of stuff. But as the years went on, and I became a teenager, then I was getting into this kind of thing. I was interested in parapsychology and the paranormal, and when I wasn't just playing with my band, playing my guitar in my band. That's what I was most interested in. But on the side, then I'd read a lot, and so I got into. I eventually found some channeled stuff. I think maybe the first channeled book I ever saw was, well, there were two things. I think my mom had like an Edgar Cayce book and a Ramtha book. So I read those, and I was like, oh, this stuff's like crazy, but in an interesting way. And so eventually I found the raw material online, and that led to finding the Cassiopean material, because basically both allegedly sixth density beings, right? Well, what is that? How does that work? And so with that, like really truncated history, that's where I was coming from. And so I looked at the material as more of, well, it's, or how did Laura put it right when she was introducing me? Basically, well, okay, yes, showing that the Cassiopean material is coherent, right? It presents a coherent story, a coherent framework of looking at things. That's kind of the way I look at it when I put on like my researcher hat. Is that there's a certain framework, a certain like whole picture that's being presented. Now, whether every detail is true, who knows? But it seems to make sense. And when, like, at least in the broad strokes, when you get into some of the details, maybe it's again hard to check. Maybe you even find some details where it's like, well, I'm not quite sure about that, in that session or this session. But when you kind of back up and look at it from a larger perspective, that's when it kind of seems to kind of fit together. At which point you're like, oh well, okay, that's interesting. That makes sense. That puts all of these other facts into a perspective that I never considered them before. But I'd say that overall for me, even if there are things that can't be checked, like Laura mentioned at the beginning, like neither she nor I are like believers, let's say in a biblical sense. I think that probably applies to how we approach most things. Like to speak for myself, I like to hold ideas like lightly, like baby birds, and to consider them. If I were to find out, well, I'll make a comparison with like a believer. So believers often will take the Bible, let's say, and there's a whole bunch of facts. Well, what they consider facts, and they have to be considered facts. And if one of them gets questioned, then it's a painful experience. And I've talked to some really hardcore believers like that, where you can see that their entire belief structure depends on every one of those facts being true, right? And so if you challenge one of them, it's like that chink in the armor is enough to destroy the whole structure, in their mind at least. That's kind of the way it appears from the outside. Whereas if you're holding ideas lightly, you can toss them around, and you're not really sure if they'll break or not, because they're little birds. They can fly away if they want to. But like, if any one idea is wrong, it's like, oh well, it looks like that was wrong, or oh wow, it looks like that was right. I mean, it's a lot more of what I consider a freer and funner way of looking at things, where it's more about the kind of like the joy of discovery, or even like in science, like the joy of disproving something. There's not, like, to me, there's not that emotional energy of like, oh, this needs to be right, or if this isn't right, I'm going to be devastated. So I guess that's just a long way of saying that, yeah, there are some things that there isn't any proof for, at least at this point, and it doesn't really matter to me, because I'm not kind of like fully invested in this being 100% true and that being 100% true. It's more like, oh, well, that looks like that was true, or oh, that one wasn't. It's kind of the way I look at it, the way I approach it.
I want to get both of your insights into what these beings are. The Cassiopaeans, you call them hyperdimensional. There seems to be a lot of gray area and confusion when it comes to what these beings are, what we're really interacting with. And I'd love to get your thoughts into what they are.
Well, the Cassiopaeans have said themselves, they have said several things. First of all, they said, we are you in the future. And that doesn't mean, you as in a total collectivity, but it doesn't mean a you as in a single individual either. It's more like a selection of individuals, of a certain frequency resonance, I suppose. And then they say they are humanoid light beings. That is, they look like they have a humanoid shape, but light structure. And they've also referred to sixth density beings as what we commonly know as angels, or think of as angels, not necessarily know, because a lot of people claim to have angels that, I'm not too sure that they're firing on all cylinders. But, they say that what we commonly refer to as angels or archangels are sixth density beings. So that's not strictly, usually when we use the term hyperdimensional, that gets into, technicalities, and there can be many dimensions. And I understand, according to the C's, that there are only 7 what they call densities. First density being like, primal matter, earth, minerals, rocks, that sort of thing. And then second density is any, really basic living things, starting with, amoebas right up through the animal kingdom. And then you switch over from the animal kingdom into human beings, and that's third density. And third density, of course, has a mix and a range and a spectrum of types of, human looking type beings, just like second density has, from amoebas to gorillas, or amoebas to elephants, or amoebas to, whatever. There's a range, there's a spectrum, and human beings apparently come in the same type of range of spectrums, and then fourth density, which we may assume, also has a spectrum from the lowest level to a higher level, is supposed to be the next density up. And according to the C's, it's paraphysical. It's partly physical, partly ethereal. In other words, you have a certain amount of control over your reality by way of your mind or your emotions. You can change your reality a lot easier than you can here, and here in our density, people are always talking about, create your own reality, but it doesn't really seem to work that way because our reality is a little bit more unforgiving, so to say. There are things that can be done, but they aren't usually very dramatic. And every once in a while, a dramatic thing does happen, but it's rather rare. There was, I reported on it in one of my books that there was some scientists who were going to experiment with this, changing physicality, mind over matter type of thing. And they had a bunch of experienced meditators, and they meditated on different things. And the ultimate outcome of their whole experience was that they managed to change a small sample of water, change the pH of the small sample of water. And that's the most they were able to do with intentional meditation. But at the same time, we know there are people like Padre Pio and others who have levitated. And we know that there are, absolute miracles of healing. And you look at somebody like Daniel Dunglass-Home and Eusapia Palladino and some of these other amazing physical mediums that could do things that were just unbelievable. So that there is something that's possible, but it's not commonly available to the average person. And that you create your own reality, people give people the wrong idea, I think, about it, because there are ways of creating your own reality, but they involve actually doing things in the reality itself in order to bring those changes about. And a lot of it has to do with changes in yourself. So fourth density, paraphysical. And I suppose paraphysical could be from the lowest range, where more physical and less spiritual, but still have more ability to control your reality than, say, somebody in third density. And of course, there's probably a border region where these densities overlap. And there may be people in our reality who are very, very close to being, fourth density type beings who are better able to control their reality. And then now, supposedly, according to the C's, fifth density is the contemplation zone. It's where you go when you die, and you recycle back into, the third or fourth density, or in some cases, we understand there are even individuals who, because of very extreme circumstances that are not very pleasant, basically return to being primal matter. They don't really have a soul, and they just, or if they do, it smashes and so forth. So that's not a very pleasant thought, but they've talked about that. And then the sixth density, humanoid light beings. And then seventh density, which is all, the one, everything, and you could say the seventh density and first density are like two sides of the same coin in a certain sense. Seventh density is the all in a certain sense, and it's also, the beginning of all creation. So I have learned to content myself with realizing that there are a lot of these things I really can't grasp, because we're like fish in a dirty fishbowl, trying to understand the world outside the fishbowl. And it's way more complex than we can even imagine, I think. I mean, we've had some discussion with the C's that would just make your head hurt, because it's like, I can't stretch my brain that far. And I'm not really a stupid person. But I can't stretch my, now maybe somebody who has some kind of real abstract thinking capacity could probably go somewhere with that. But anyway, that's the answer to that. Who and what the C's are, and about the various levels. And of course, the 7 levels are very common in many esoteric systems. And the one that I found that actually has had some of the closest resonances to what the C's have said are the teachings or the works of Ibn al-Arabi, the Sufi sheikh of, I think he was from Spain. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Harrison.
He definitely spent time in Spain. I can't remember if he was born there or not, but
yeah. And he was from what, the 10th, 11th, 12th century, somewhere around there.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and he talked about the 7 levels, and he did some diagrams that expressed something similar to 1st through 7th density. So sometimes reading his material is very helpful, because, and that's one of the things we've tried to do is, as we've received this material, we've tried to do a lot of reading to find out, is there anybody else saying anything similar? What are the comparisons? How does this stack up against other teachings and so forth? And it stands up very well to some of the more highly respected teachings, such as, al-Arabi. So, and of course, Gurdjieff is very much imbued with some of the Sufi ideas. So, we enjoy working with Gurdjieff's material and ideas, and we also enjoy Carlos Castaneda. There are a lot of things that he says that kind of, intermesh and interconnect. So, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Anything to add, Harrison?
Nope. Just the one thing that came to mind while Laura was speaking is that she kind of got to it at the end. Is that there's a long tradition not only of something like 7 levels, but if you look at this kind of like chain of being of the kind of the ladder of creation, right? And these ideas go back throughout all of kind of the alchemical and hermetic traditions, but they're kind of all over the place, where you have these levels of being, and it starts low at something simple and very unconscious, and gets more complex and more conscious the higher you get. And so traditionally there have been like various schemas of like matter, and then various types of animals, and then there's the kind of the highest animals, and then there's humans, and then there's maybe angels, and then something else, and then God, right? And most philosophical traditions, like in Western philosophy, it's pretty much here's humans, and then here's God, if there's God at all, right? If it's not an atheist philosophy. So at least in the last several centuries of Western thought, they've kind of, there's no real place for a chain of being higher than humanity and lower than God, right? So there's this big empty space that's waiting to be populated. But other kind of religious or spiritual or occult or whatever traditions, like they've filled that in like a long time ago with various names and to varying degrees, right? So there's at least a tradition to go on, and the Cassiopean version of that is as Laura laid out, right? So you've got everything up to humanity, but then there's a few layers between humanity and the all, the what we might call God or the cosmic mind. That there's a few layers that populate that area, right? And so above you'll get beings that are more like humans, but compared to, let's say, like a god or an angel, but not quite human, right? And that's probably where we'd fit in aliens. Probably a bunch of other beings that historically have been, referred to by various human groups, like the jinn or the fairies or something. Like there's probably a bunch of that goes into that layer, and then there's a layer above that, which is again like of a different order, so it's qualitatively different than the layer below. And just like humans are qualitatively different in some sense from the animal kingdom and all other lower forms of life. So I just put it into that context and say that, like, so for the C's, the according to themselves, that them as sixth density beings, they're on a level, that's kind of a few above us, right? So it's
kind of like a metaphysical ecosystem, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think Joshua Cutchin, who's an author that I like, he's got a. Yeah. Like, I haven't read his latest two book series, but what is it? An Ecology of Souls or something like that. Right. So that's kind of what it's all about up there, and who knows, what it's really like. But at least according to the Seas, they would be on the like non-physical level. So not like aliens that can kind of come into our dimension and grapple with us, but on the level of, if we were to perceive them, like Laura said, maybe light, but there's something non-physical, something almost like actual but potential about them. That's when we get into abstract and can kind of go in all kinds of directions, but hard to say.
Well, what I want to get into next may take up the entirety of the rest of the show, and that's the nature of this human experience, the nature of evil, the parasitic ruling class, the parasitic and anti-human systems that we're subjected to, how it all came about, and why we're here. What are we doing here, and why are we subjected to this parasitic ruling system?
Let me give one part, and then I'm going to hand it over to Harrison. What it's all about is, all there is lessons. We exist to learn because we are all fragments of the all, and the all has, what does the all have to do for all of eternity except, fragment into individuated souls and send them out to do things and experience things and learn about things and bring all of that back. So everything we do and everything we experience is all about learning. The universe or the cosmos or reality is it's a school. And what I'm saying here is what the Seas say. Okay? It makes sense to me. It's a school. And we learn from it. And as we learn, we grow, because the more we learn, the more knowledge we acquire. And that knowledge can be, reading. It can be learning in any number of ordinary ways that we think of learning. And it also is learning from experiences, because you learn better from experiences than from just about anything in the world. And these experiences actually add weight to your being. They add, you have more gravitas. And so that's the simple answer. Carry on.
Now, one more thing. Was there at some point an infiltration of dark forces, or were the dark forces, in a sense, sanctioned to help us learn and grow?
Well, in a way, yeah, because you have to think of it this way. One of the biggest problems that I have when I'm reading, modern or any kind of philosophy is that they're always making these arguments based on the idea that God is good, and good means being good according to human standards. God is love and God is good, and a loving God wouldn't do this. They have this problem with if God is loving, he wouldn't let evil things happen to us. And if he was good, he wouldn't let this and that and the other thing happen. And if, he was all powerful, he would stop all of that. Therefore, God doesn't exist. Well, stop and back up a minute and think about this. The all blinks neither at the darkness nor the light, because it is all God. Okay? And there are even echoes of this in the Old and New Testament, because in the Old Testament, there's the meeting of the sons of God or the angels or whatever. And Satan one of the sons of God came before the Lord, and he says, well, see your servant Job, he's so righteous, he's so holy, but, he wouldn't be if you'd let me, torture him a little bit. And God says, do your worst, Job is just absolutely holy. So in that case, you're seeing a prime example of God sanctioning bad things to happen in order to prove Job. I don't think about it in terms of proving. I think about it in terms of learning. Then there is the example from 2 Thessalonians where Paul says that God sends upon them a misleading influence, a delusion to error, so that they would believe what is false, so that all who love the truth, might be shown and might be saved. So there's another example of God, sending, darkness upon people in order to, do something in this case so that those who love truth enough to push through this darkness can show themselves. In the sense of, the C's have talked about having, there's two pathways: service to self and service to others. And this is actually a concept that was brought out by the raw material, which was Elkins, Ruckert, and McCarty, and they were doing experimental work too. They were doing it a little bit differently than we do, but their work was very experimental, and it was excellent work. So they talk about service to self and service to others. Now, service to self is, pretty much self-serving. And service to others is serving others in order to serve self, because it is serving the self that you serve others. So these two pathways they both lead back to God, in a sense. And it's hard for people to understand or to think about it, that if you have a concept of cosmic mind, or God, if you want to call it that it's not all good, all loving, all knowing, all powerful. Well, maybe it just isn't that way because they have the wrong concept. Because to a service to self individual, what you would consider good isn't good. It's bad because it's negative to him. And, it's kind of like an arbitrary thing to say, well, his view is wrong and my view is right. See? I know that's kind of a scary thing for people to grapple with, but that seems to be the way it is. And the secret seems to be that once you know and understand that, then you begin to operate on the frequency that you choose. Do you choose to be service to self, or do you choose to be service to others? And once you begin to operate on whichever path, whichever frequency you have chosen, that changes your vibration. And at a certain point, because of the chasm between the two, you become unavailable to the service to self forces. And that's really the whole thing that we're trying to learn, is how to become unavailable to them. Because you have to understand, in a certain sense, it's almost like electrical charges too, or matter and antimatter. When they come together, they annihilate, right? Or if the charges come together, they get degaussed, or whatever. So if a very powerful service to self individual and a very powerful service to others individual come into conflict and interact, and if they are perfectly equally balanced, then they end up, both of them, losing their juice, and kind of like, it's kind of like two fighters in a ring that, that neither one can beat the other, and they just exhaust each other until they have no juice left. So the idea is to build up your juice and conserve your juice, and to try to avoid any of those kinds of interactions so you don't get degaussed. And that is what enables you to progress to the next level. And Harrison, take over. I'm digging myself into deep.
Well, I want you to repeat the original question.
Sure. The nature of this human experience. Is there a parasitic infiltration? Was it sanctioned? And how does everything lead us to the situation we are now?
Okay. Well, I want to ask ask you. So, what exactly do you mean by a parasitic infiltration?
So there's some that believe that
I want to see what level you're thinking
there,
on.
and this isn't my personal outlook on things, but there's many guests that I have that believe that there was some sort of metaphysical or spiritual infiltration by these negative intelligences into our consciousness field, and it, in a sense, caused this programming of humanity that perpetuates evil behavior. And I more align with what Laura was just saying, but I'd love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah. So I think that this is one of these kind of like really high level questions that's probably impossible to know the truth about 100%. But I'll kind of give you the way I look at it. I think that they're probably both true to a degree. And I think that at various points in human history, you can look back and something has probably happened along those lines. So I think that there were probably things that happened, let's say even in the last century, or maybe the last 150 years, that kind of opened a door to a kind of parasitic infection from higher realities. But that something like that has probably happened numerous times over the tens and hundreds of thousands of years of human and pre-human history, where various doors, so to speak, have been opened, allowing in certain influences, and maybe some were bigger than others. So I think it's both, in the sense that there's this kind of, if not cyclical, then just recurring pattern of ups and downs in human history, where things get better in certain regards for a certain amount of time, and then they get worse, and back and forth and back and forth. And that's kind of one of my focuses of research when I'm writing about ponerology.
Let me you can think about this in the terms that the Zoroastrians teach, which is that Ahriman and Ahura Mazda had kind of an agreement that they would alternate rule. I think I don't remember the exact term of years, but it was a few thousand years that one would dominate, and a few thousand years the other would dominate, and then the next one would come back, and then back and forth. So it was like a cyclical thing. And but that could, I don't want to get too much into Zoroastrianism right now, but it's probably one of the more interesting religious forms that has existed that I'm aware of since any religions we know about. I would say that Zoroastrianism is, to a great extent, largely responsible for Christianity also. So carry on, Harrison.
Yeah, I think that's a great framework to look at it from. And so oftentimes when I put my ponerology cap on, I'm writing almost strictly from the kind of human perspective. So every once in a while, I'll bring in a little bit of kind of the supernatural element and try to find connections between the two. But I think that the thing about reality is that it's crazy that you can look at it from all these different lenses and it works, from each one. So you can be a strict kind of materialist and get a pretty good picture of the material world, right? You're going to be missing a whole bunch of other stuff, but it works. So but then you can look at it from a totally different angle. And then what I like, of course, is synthesizing and looking at it from all these angles at the same time and seeing what they all miss and how they all work together. So from looking at evil from that perspective, you can look at what's happening in the world and history and kind of limit yourself to a human perspective and get a pretty good idea of what's going on from a human perspective. Then you can add in, other stuff, the kind of higher influence stuff and look at it from a different direction. So I think it really depends on what period of history you're looking at and what level of analysis and interpretation you're looking for. So when I mentioned like the last 100 years, let's say, you can look at from a human perspective, you can look at the social dynamics and the demographic, like structural demographic dynamics, like Peter Turchin writes about, and get a pretty interesting and decent understanding of how societies like not only rise and fall, but go through good and bad periods, and how we're at this kind of like the Western world is entering and has entered a bad period, right? The crisis period of our not only this cycle, but of like civilization, Western civilization in general. But you look at the last 100 years, and you can trace that cycle. You can also look at it from the kind of paranormal angle and look at the history of UFOs and what's going on there. And some weird stuff, happened. Kind of seemed to take off in the mid to late 40s. And that's not to say that that's when UFOs started, because there are credible reports from going back to the 30s and then the 20s and the teens and the late 1800s. But the modern era of ufology, for instance, seems to take on. Seems to start, well, it seems to be, you can contain it within the last 150 years, and it really takes off in the mid-40s. So what was going on then, right? You can wonder, you can ask questions, and I think, but I think something happened, right? So I think that probably the development of nuclear weapons probably had something to do with it, but behind the scenes there was all kinds of human stuff going on, right? And the 20th century is full of crazy stuff just on the human level. If you look at the kind of political and the socio-political things that were going on during that period. So of course, the 20th century is the century of totalitarianism. Well, what is totalitarianism? That leads to one of my big interests, which is ponerology, the political study of evil, essentially, the study of political evil. And so what is the nature of totalitarianism? Well, what is the nature of psychopathy? How do those things all work together to create a political system that is dominated from bottom almost, or from top almost to bottom by a certain kind of evil psychological profile? What does that look like? How does that work? And then how might that relate to a more metaphysical or supernatural perspective? So it really there's so many angles to look at the problem from, and so many angles, but also so many levels. Like Laura said, you can take the super big picture one and say it's all lessons, and then you can zoom in to varying degrees to get like right into the level of like a single human life, or you can zoom out a bit and look at at geopolitics and what's going on internationally. But on that big picture of your question, I'd just come back to that I think there's kind of a melding of the two, that on the largest level, the things that happen because this is all just it's kind of cheesy, but it's all just part of the plan, right? It's not necessarily a plan, but it's all part of the framework of how the universe is set up and how life works. But then you can zoom into the specifics and say, okay, well, here's what happened historically. Well, it looks like something happened here. Like maybe Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons really did open up a portal to bring through the being Lamb or whatever, and and that had a big influence over the last 70 years or whatever. Who knows? That's when an historical study is necessary to look at, okay, this particular time and place and who was doing what and what happened after then. So maybe you want to get to that level of specificity for something, but
let me say that if you study history, you see that we have been at this point more than once. We've been here before. And it's been just as bad, if not worse, than it is now. And usually when it happens, the result is some kind of cataclysmic disruption of civilization. If you look back at the archaeological and geological record, you see the evidence of previous civilizations, and they're layers of them. There are different ones. So it seems that when a civilization gets to the point such as ours is now, that it tends to destroy itself. It tends to, once again, it comes back to the STS and STO, coming together in some kind of a battle, and they just basically lose all their juice and they get degaussed, and everything kind of goes back to a level playing field, and things have to build up all over again. So we're not unique. But then there's another thing that I have thought about for years, And that, goes back to electrical charge again. And, evil and good, you could say that they're, and remember when I say that, I'm saying evil and good from my perspective as a person who, has chosen the service to others pathway. For me, good is serving others and helping others and giving, my information away and basically dedicating my life to this whole project. So, that hopefully it'll help humanity. But that's not necessarily the perspective of a service to others individual who just wants to subsume everything and everybody to itself. So having said that, there's this electrical charge thing, and the C's have said that it's all about balance, and the universe is always seeking balance. And when it gets unbalanced, then things happen, and they happen as a natural course of events that bring things back into balance. And that is so that, positive living or positive individuals, service to others individuals would be like a positive charge, and service to self individuals would be like a negative charge. Well, we can see that we are building up a really, really big negative electrical charge on this planet right now from the service to others perspective. I mean, it's a really, human beings are like capacitors, and they are just, building up this charge, building it up, building it up, building it up. And my thought is that this has an effect on our cosmic environment, our sun, the other planets in our solar system, even the universe at large, possibly, because we are building up this really powerful negative electric charge. And when you have a powerful negative electric charge, what generally happens? There is an event that causes a discharge. And so the way I'm looking at things right now is that we are building this negative charge because we are in the preparatory stages for a big discharge. Now, will that be cataclysmic? Probably. Will it be the end of the world? Probably not. I mean, the previous civilizations coming and going is kind of evidence that this happens at periodic intervals. And if you look at, for example, ancient Rome, look at the reign of say, Nero, and the absolute filth and the disgusting things that were going on at that time. And then some of the later emperors, there were just, things were so filthy and so disgusting that, things that are happening today are just comparative. You just say, oh, yeah, I've seen this before. And if you think about it that way, and then you think about what happened to Rome in 540 AD. And come on, it was buried under 9 meters of, seafloor stuff. They had to excavate Rome. So we're building up a charge. It's part of the natural cycle of things. People who learn about this, who learn about service to others, who learn about service to self, who learn about charges, who learn about building the gravitational weight of their own being, have the possibility of being outside this, of being not necessarily sucked into all of this. We still exist on the same planet with everybody who's going through all of this sort of thing, but it is possible to have it not affect you very strongly in your own personal life if you are making certain choices and paying attention, changing your frequency, growing your weight, seeing things, understanding things, and basically in a sense, and this is the tough one, you know, feet don't fail me now. You still got to love it. You've got to love the cosmos no matter what it's doing, because it's doing what it's doing for a reason. Things are happening for a reason. Those service to others beings have as much right to exist as service to self beings, or, you know, whatever. Service to self beings have as much right to exist as service to others. You know, they have come to dominate. They have infiltrated our society. They have, I mean, the way that they've infiltrated has been, you know, like Harrison was pointing out, there were evil people on Earth who made deals with evil beings from the next density up, the fourth density, and they have turned the U.S. into a huge magnet for service to self accumulation of charge. I mean, the U.S., I'm afraid, is just going to, you know, I mean, when the discharge comes, the U.S. is not going to be in a very pleasant situation. And the Caesar said this. You know, a lot of things I'm saying, you know, are just informed by what they have told us. I'm you know, putting it in my own phraseology and also mixing it in with some of the historical stuff that I've learned and some of the research I've done. But that's pretty much the way it is. We are definitely infiltrated. We are infiltrated by psychopaths mainly on the human level. Psychopaths are easily used by negative hyperdimensional beings to manipulate. I mean, if you look at the way things have gone and developed, and I've always said this because, you know, I used to follow trails of these so-called conspiracies, as they, you know, conspiracy to do this, conspiracy to do that. You know, like Masonic conspiracies and alchemical conspiracies and so forth. And you follow the trails and you follow the trails. And I realized one day, you know, we're talking about human beings here when we talk about conspiracies. And human beings of the type who would do the negative things that are described as being done by some of these individuals, you know, the kind that harm other people and harm society and only out for themselves, they can't think ahead to how their conspiracy is going to turn out, say, 100 years from now. They are only interested in what they can get and do right here and right now. So how can you describe a human conspiracy that extends for hundreds of years when you know that human beings are instant gratification creatures? And that's when you come to the realization that these conspiracies, these events, have to be managed from another level of reality where 100 years is not a long time. And they're able to manipulate these people in the here and now by, you know, triggering their I'm going to get mine now thing, so that they do what they do. And then the next generation, I'm going to get mine now. And then little by little, step by step, they are bringing this hundreds of year old conspiracy to fruition. I mean, you look at somebody like Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates. Now, they have children. Do you think that they really comprehend what the world is going to be like for their children based on the evil shit that they are doing? And excuse my French. But you know what I'm saying here? I mean, do they have even an iota of comprehension of what they're leaving for their own children? So either they are totally evil and are willing to sacrifice their children to Moloch, you know, as a symbol of total evil. And come on, there are people all across the U.S. that are sacrificing their children to Moloch. I mean, on a daily basis. But either that, or they just simply have no ability to understand consequences. And that is one of the main characteristics, as Harrison will tell you, of the psychopath. They do not have a concept of time and consequences. They can't grasp that. It doesn't work in their brain. And so if you have a human being who doesn't really understand time, and that if you do this at a certain point in time, that is going to happen. They have they have a good knowledge of how to manipulate people. Psychopaths do. I mean, in the here and now, they know how to get you to do what they want you to do here and now, but they don't really understand that there is going to be a snapback. There is going to be repercussions. There are going to be consequences. I mean, it's like a little kid. Little kids don't know consequences. You have to teach them consequences. And that's the big problem. So yeah, there's been an infiltration. It comes from various sources and angles, and depending upon which perspective you take and to look at it, it's either just the natural order of the universe, balancing, going back and forth, or from the next level down, it's these evil ultra-terrestrials or hyperdimensionals who are controlling humanity, bringing some kind of evil plan into fruition where they're going to, get rid of 75% or 98% of the planet's population and take over the planet once it transitions into fourth density. So there's different levels of this conspiracy and different levels of this infiltration. But yeah, evil is freaking real. And, from our point of view here in third density, even though I have said we must love the cosmos because it is what it is and it does what it does. Yeah. At our level, we don't have to love evil and we don't have to turn the other cheek.
Excellent. We have just a couple of minutes left. Harrison, Laura, is there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with today?
Go for it, Harrison.
Ooh, that's tough. Not really. I guess at this point, unless you come up with
we'll definitely have to do this again because we just scratched the surface on a lot of this stuff. Yeah. Maybe we could end on, if you have hope that we could redivert the trajectory that we're on collectively by becoming more aware of these things. A lot of people I talk to talk about this mass awakening that we're experiencing on the planet, that people are becoming aware of the darkness, which I have witnessed firsthand, but to what degree, to what scale, how many people are actually becoming aware, I don't know. It's hard to tell. We're kind of in echo chambers here on the internet. We interact with what the algorithm allows us to interact with, and we're only going to be able to tell that if we actually walk outside our homes and talk to people across the planet. So it becomes difficult to gauge, but maybe we could end with that. How do you think everything is unfolding?
Let me just say this. We got into this mess by a group choice. That is, all humanity made a choice to enter into third density to experience this world. And the only thing that's going to get us out is if there is a mass choice to resist what's being done. And that really has to be a mass choice because, like I said, you can't violate the free will of another. You cannot, you just can't, because it has repercussions on you and very serious and severe ones too. So the main thing that we can do at this point in time is to wake people up. There's going to be, I'm afraid, because if you look at the masses of people, now there's a lot of people becoming aware that there's evil. But how are they becoming aware? Are they becoming aware in the context of the good old time religion, Bible, or are they understanding it seriously in the context of frequency modification of their being, of acquiring knowledge and doing research and finding out what's really going on and learning that you've got to there's going to be a big degaussing, there's going to be a big contact potential differentiation discharge. So, what context are they waking up in? My guess is there's going to be a lot more and lots more serious suffering before enough people become aware and are looking for the answers. And, that's, and the people who are aware can do is to try to stay under the radar, because when the time comes and those people are ready to ask questions, they're going to need somebody to give them those answers. And somebody's got to be there to do it. And, so it's important for the people who have those answers to protect their physical integrity as long as they can, so that they're available to give them.
Right on.
So that's basically what I think. And there's going to be a lot more suffering. I don't see a mass awakening quite in the context that you say it, but I do see people becoming massively aware that there is real evil, and it's out there stalking our planet in 1,000 League boots. But are they ready to do something? Have they been so marginalized by being made ill, by their health being destroyed, by the chemicals that have been put in their food, the chemicals put in their body, the mass mind control techniques that are being used on them? Those still work on a large number of people, and there's a program for just about everyone. That's what has to be overcome. And that's probably one of the reasons why, my particular experiment, my particular view has been so vehemently marginalized and suppressed. I mean, back in the early 2000s, Google disappeared us from search results. I mean, we were early victims of Google before it even really, got going. I think they were taking us out by hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Harrison, final thoughts?
I'd say on that topic, I'm an optimistic pessimist. So kind of like in Dumb and Dumber, right? Jim Carrey, the line, it's like, so what are my chances? And she says like 1 in a million, and he's like, oh, so you're telling me there's a chance, right? And he, like that's kind of what I'm like at heart, that things look really bad, and there's not a great chance, but there always is a chance, right? There's always a chance for things to turn around, for things to go the right way. So I think that a lot of people don't understand probability. When something's like a 1 in a billion chance, it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means it's very unlikely. And when it happens, then you look back on it, you're like, whoa, what were the chances? Again, to use another pop culture reference from Seinfeld about the proctologist, right? The joke, it was a 1 in a million chance, right? And it happened. Like, those things happen. And when they do, that's when we kind of call them miracles sometimes. And so yeah, I'm a believer in miracles of a certain type, and of a certain interpretation. So I think that there's reason to hope, and there's rational reason to have hope. But you should also be a realist and have an idea of what's actually going on and what the actual possibilities and probabilities are, right? So if you're going to be hopeful, then I think that it probably behooves all of us to try to get an idea of what that would look like. And I think that's kind of what Laura provided there, is what does the hope look like? What do we think needs to happen? And at least exercise our minds a bit to try to get an idea of what can happen and what needs to be done to get there. So those are my comments.
Let me add, we just witnessed a miracle when Donald Trump didn't die. I mean, he turned his head at the exact moment. I mean, to me, that was like, it's like whoever is, and the C's did comment on that. They said that there was a meeting and a decision to not allow him to be assassinated. So that was kind of like a miracle. The influence to make him turn his head was allowed to enter in. And then, I personally have experienced miracles, like what Harrison just said, 1 in a billion possibilities. So miracles do happen. So we don't give up hope. We do what we do because it's the right thing to do. And we keep going day by day by day because it's the right thing to do. and don't put an expectation on it, but just keep doing it.
100%. That's a great note to end on. This is great information. Like I was telling you both, we'll definitely have to do this again, get deeper into the information. Before we close out, I will have all your links in the description so everyone can easily access your websites. But for those listening, tell everyone where they can find out more about you both and the Cassiopaea Experiment.
Well, we've got kind of an old website for the Cassiopaea Experiment. It's Cassiopaea, CASSIOPAEA.org. And there on that page, there's a link to the forum. And our forum is wildly active. I mean, it has been active. We've got our thread on the COVID thing is like millions of views, millions. And it was active all through the whole COVID
Thousands
thing.
of pages long.
And we kept a lot of people sane during that mess. And our other website is SOT.net, and that's SOTT.net. And that's our news website where you will find our presentation of the news and we originally started community noting news back 20 some years ago. I mean, we would get a news article from that was clear and obvious propaganda, and our editors put it up and they community note it. They put comments all the way through it, pointing out where the lies are and where it's distorted. So we've been doing community noting on news articles for a long time. So and our community noting and our view on the news is kind of informed by the Cassiopaea Experiment, although we don't talk about it on the SOT website. So those are the two main
Excellent.
websites.
Laura, Harrison, thank you both so much. Can't wait to talk again in the future. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We will be talking again tomorrow, and we'll see y'all then.